Coming up, I'll tell you why another Nets trade and several other roster moves could be coming before the start of the regular season. All that and more after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, I'm going to be diving into the Nets salary cap situation. I'll detail how it could lead to another trade and why it's adding to the uncertainty of several players from last year's roster. And guys, we are into the Nets preseason. We obviously had the opener on Saturday, and the Nets are coming off of what was probably the busiest offseason in the NBA, making those 5 first-round picks as well as 4 offseason trades and just sifting through the rubble of the fallout of what has been this massive roster overhaul from last season. There's still more work to be done, and a lot of that has to do with the Nets' need to meet the salary floor. And where the Nets are at right now, they have 15 guaranteed contracts. Obviously, they have the 3 non-guaranteed players in Tyrese Martin, Jalen Wilson, and Drew Timme. But NBA teams are required to spend 90% of the salary cap by the start of the regular season. And if you just account for the 15 guaranteed contracts Nets have, because you're only allowed to carry 15 players during the regular season, the Nets are short of that salary floor. They're about $4.25 million below the salary floor, accounting for those 15 guaranteed contracts. So there's more work to be done. As crazy as that sounds, the Nets are going to have to do, maneuver more to reach that salary floor and that minimum spend limit. And that's pretty unbelievable given what they've done. Like, I was talking to people, within the Nets organization on Saturday before the preseason opener, and I was like, you guys must be happy. We finally got game action coming. You can take a little bit of a breather, relax for a second. And they were like, there's more work to be done. Like, we got more decisions to make before the start of the regular season. So there's more work to be done, and I want to break down what that could look like and how the Nets could meet that salary floor, what moves they could make. And there's several options I'm going to run through, not in any order, but the first option I'm going to talk about is another potential trade. I mean, the Nets have this cap space that they have weaponized throughout the offseason, obviously making those salary dumps. Drake Powell, Michael Porter Jr., Haywood Highsmith, Kobe Buffkin, accumulating assets with that. And they could do that again to meet this salary floor. I said, $4.25 million below the salary floor. There could be another salary dump out there before the start of the regular season or at any point during the season. But if they're using the salary dump to meet the floor, it would be before the start of the regular season. And, I've talked about this in the past of the Philadelphia 76ers were a team that was seen as a potential option, with them looking to shed money in order to sign Quentin Grimes to restricted free agency. They had guys like Andre Drummond and Kelly Oubre who they could have been looking to get off of, but Quentin Grimes, obviously, like Cam Thomas, signed his qualifying offer, so it doesn't seem like the 76ers still could be looking to shed money, but they don't have the same kind of urgency right now. But if we're talking about a trade, there are several teams who could be looking to shed money. I'd be looking at teams who are trying to get below the luxury tax or the first apron, and there are a few. The Boston Celtics are obviously one, but if you look at their roster, their biggest piece that they're probably going to be looking to salary dump is Anthony Simons, and I don't see that as a trade that's going to happen before the start of the regular season. I think the Nets would definitely be in on that, and I think that the Nets and Celtics will have talks about that, but I think it will come closer to the trade deadline. And other teams I'd be looking at who could be trying to shed money are the Orlando Magic are one, the Toronto Raptors are another. Both of those teams are above the luxury tax. The Raptors, I think, are slightly above the first apron, and they both could be looking to duck that. I mean, in the Raptors case, like we know, they're kind of in this weird situation where they're trying to compete, but yet they fire Masai Ujiri. They have, they make this weird Brandon Ingram trade and then extend him. So they look like they're trying to compete, but based on what their prospects are, paying the luxury tax doesn't make all that much sense. So they're a team who I think could be looking to shed money. They have some guys at the bottom of their roster. Maybe they could be looking to dump. The Orlando Magic, another team who, if they want to dip below the luxury tax, they're about $5 or $6 million above it right now. And they have some players. You want to talk about Jet Howard, I think, is a player that has been floated. Hoops Types Michael Scotto, friend of the pod, had floated that as a Nets trade possibility. They also have guys like Anthony Black, if the Nets want to take a chance on another reclamation project or just a young guy like that. Probably more Jet Howard, who obviously has a connection to Juwan Howard on this Nets coaching staff. I'm not, giving out anything like sourced. I've heard the Nets being linked to these guys, just saying, looking at teams who want to shed money and guys who could potentially be on the move in that regard. I think there are possibilities there. And if the Nets do make a salary dump trade, they are going to, they could take one of these players in and then they would have to waive one of their guaranteed players. And regardless, it seems like there could be a guaranteed player who's on the way out as a result of this, whether or not the Nets make a trade. I've said in the past, there are several options there. I think the three who realistically come to mind are Haywood Highsmith, Kobe Buffkin, Dariq Whitehead, and the first two, Highsmith and Buffkin, I don't even really think are serious candidates to be waived right now. Like, I haven't heard anything along those lines. And based on things that we've heard from them and also from the Nets coaching staff, I don't necessarily feel like that's direction this is going to go. Haywood Highsmith has talked about being ready for the start of the regular season. He has talked about, him having extensive conversations with Jordi Fernandez about the defensive identity the team wants to have, about things that he can bring, about him being a leader in the locker room. Also, Kobe Buffkin. Jordi Fernandez said that this was a player that the Nets were high on throughout the pre-draft process in 2023. And given that, and given they went after him and they traded for him and they didn't get a pick alongside him, obviously getting Buffkin helps them meet the salary floor, but they didn't have any other, they weren't incentivized to do that by the Hawks giving a pick. The Hawks didn't send anything else out in that deal. So it would indicate somewhat that the Nets like what they see from Buffkin. So the last guy is Dariq Whitehead, and he is a player that if the Nets make a trade, I could see him being on the way out. And regardless, even if they don't make a trade, there are other ways that the Nets can maneuver to meet this salary floor. So what are those? What could it say about Whitehead's future and the future of some other players battling for a roster spot? I'll get into all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, FanDuel fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about Brooklyn's salary cap situation and more moves that could be coming for the team to reach the salary floor. I outlined it on the first segment. The Nets about $4.25 million below the salary floor right now. And a trade, I said, was obviously one option. The Nets could make a trade, use that salary cap space. They could take in that player without sending anything out, and say they take in a player who makes $4 or $5 million. They could then waive a player. Dariq Whitehead, probably the most likely candidate, and that could help them. That could get them up to the salary floor. But they could also have to waive or look to waive a player like Whitehead or somebody else, even if they don't make a trade. And that could be a way that they meet the salary floor. And I'd be hard pressed to say it might be the most likely way right now. There are teams that could be looking to trade, but right now I'm not sure how realistic a trade is before the start of the regular season. But if the Nets don't make a trade and they are trying to reach the salary floor, another way that they could do that is by waiving a player with a guaranteed salary like Whitehead. And the reason for that being, if the Nets are $4.2 million below the salary floor, if you look at Dariq Whitehead, he's making around $3.3 million. If the Nets are to waive Whitehead's $3.3 million salary, that still counts towards their books. So in that case, they would be able to waive him, and then they would be able to guarantee the salary of one of their non-guaranteed guys and keep them around, whether Tyrese Martin or Jalen Wilson or Drew Timme. And that wouldn't get them all the way up to the salary floor, but it would get them pretty close. If you have Whitehead's $3.3 million and then you add another $2 million, that could get you pretty close there. But I've been kind of deliberating and going back and forth on this the whole offseason about whether or not the Nets would waive a player like Whitehead. And I didn't think they would, him being a 2023 first-round pick, him being a player that the Nets, invested a pick like that, an asset into just 2 years ago. But, we haven't really heard anything about Dariq Whitehead. doing anything to turn heads at training camp thus far. I talked about this on my last episode, but then we get into the preseason opener and you look at the rotations, and Tyrese Martin is well ahead of him. And then Jalen Wilson is also ahead of him. And Dariq Whitehead doesn't come in until the very end of that game. He's like coming in alongside a two-way guy like Tyson Etienne. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of momentum towards Dariq Whitehead being a guy who makes the roster ahead of a guy like Tyrese Martin, who by all accounts, multiple players have told me, Jordy Fernandez has told me, has performed really well this offseason. Like Michael Porter Jr. went as far as saying Tyrese has been the most impressive player this offseason. If you're looking at, the age difference is what I thought would keep Dariq Whitehead around. You look at Tyrese Martin is 26, Dariq Whitehead's 21. That obviously would, lend you to believe that Whitehead could have some more upside coming off all the injuries that he has. But we are entering year 3 of Whitehead's NBA career. And, up to this point, he has not really shown that he's physically going to be able to get to the point where he'll be able to, just hang with NBA level players on either end of the floor. So that's the tough aspect of it, and waiving Whitehead also, another thing that's not working for Whitehead in this regard is the fact that waiving him would help the Nets reach the salary floor. That would be a $3.3 million chunk that the Nets would then be able to add, keep one of these non-guaranteed guys and add those salaries onto the books. Whereas, if they just keep Whitehead and they waive these other non-guaranteed guys, they would be, $4 million below the salary floor. So it's not really working in Whitehead's favor that regard. And also, the rotation, things that we've heard about Tyrese Martin as opposed to how little we've heard about Whitehead, that also isn't lending confidence. Like at this point, I think it would be probably fair to say that Tyrese Martin might be the favorite over Dariq Whitehead to get that final roster spot, despite, their past standing and past pedigree, or what, the Nets using a first round pick on Whitehead. What would I do if I were the Nets? Like, I think it's tough to move on from a player like Whitehead this early. Like his rookie season was a wash because of that, shin surgery or procedure that he had to get done. That was his third lower leg surgery in like less than a 2-year span. Last season, he didn't look great in the G League. He came up to the Nets. He shot well from 3, but other than that, he didn't really do anything. Physically didn't look the part, but that was his only season that he's really been able to, try to get his feet under him and try to, look the part, or try to, work on his skills, work on his body and things along those lines. This coming season, I think it would be nice. You would like to think that a player like Whitehead with his past pedigree would have a little bit of an upward trajectory, and you would like to give a player like that a third season to be able to try to prove their worth and get another year removed from those injuries and get another year to continue crafting their skills, working on their body. And I will say with Whitehead, while there haven't been a lot of other encouraging things, the three-point shot did look good in the NBA minutes. I mean, he shot over 40% from 3 on decently high volume over his 20 appearances last season. He just didn't do anything outside of that. He couldn't get to the basket. He couldn't really put the ball on the floor. And obviously that speaks to the lack of athleticism there. So, we'll see with Whitehead, but I think it would be nice to, keep a player like him around for a third season, given what he's went through from an injury perspective, just to see if the body can develop a little bit, if he can gain some of that explosiveness back, if he can do some of those things that could lend itself to him being, more than just a 3-point shooter and then not a defensive liability. So we'll see. But if Tyrese Martin is playing at this high a level, and also you have guys like Jalen Wilson and Drew Timme, who I'm not even mentioning, but Tyrese Martin has been the guy. If he's playing at this high a level, even though he's 5 years older than Whitehead, if he looks like a guy who, could be, a back end rotation guy, or even just a valuable guy to have at the bottom of a 15, guaranteed roster spots, then it might be worth it to keep him around, especially if the Nets don't think that Dariq Whitehead has that, ability, or doesn't look like it's trending in a direction where he can get to physically where he's going to need to. So we'll see with that. But, even if the Nets were to keep Whitehead, there also is another way that they could get up to the salary floor. And that's just by guaranteeing the non-guaranteed contracts of these other guys, just for the purposes. Like, say if they kept Whitehead and they are $4.2 million below the salary floor, they have these, 3 non-guaranteed guys in Drew Timme, Jalen Wilson, and Tyrese Martin. They could guarantee 2 of those guys' salary and then waive them. And that money would still count as dead cap towards, their sheet, and that would get them up to the salary floor. And they could do that. That could be the route they go if no trade presents itself. But I would say in that case, you're basically wasting this $4.2 million in cap space. Like, you're not utilizing it for anything that's on your active roster, and you're also not utilizing it to take in a salary dump or get an asset or anything along those lines. It's really just dead money and wasted money on their books. So do I think the Nets want to do something like that? No, but if they keep Whitehead and there isn't a trade to be made, that's going to be the way that they have to reach the salary floor, is just guaranteeing the contracts of a couple of those guys, the non-guaranteed guys, and then waiving them. So we'll see how it plays out. But there are going to be more Nets moves, more maneuvers, whether trades, and definitely there are going to be some guys who get waived, guaranteed or waived in the coming days. So I'll have more coverage of all that here, but I also have some leftover thoughts about Michael Porter Jr. and Terrence Mann and what they looked like in the Nets preseason opener. What do I think it says about their roles moving forward? So I'll have all that and more when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Guys, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Guys, Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've ever put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Guys, you ever think you were saving a certain amount and then realize you're coming up well short? Monarch can identify why. It helps you notice an inefficient investment allocation and discover forgotten 401ks from past jobs. It can help you maximize investments, increase your savings rate, and easily review finances with your partner and or financial advisor. It can help you keep a clear view of your financial health week to week and long-term. Guys, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, hit on Brooklyn's salary cap situation and what they could do to reach the salary floor at the top of the episode. And closing this out, have some thoughts about what we saw in the Nets preseason opener on Saturday. I did an episode yesterday, spoke about Ben Sarath getting the starting nod. Also, Nolan Troy, what those guys looked like, what that dynamic could say about the Nets point guard rotation battle, given Yegor Dioman's injury. Also talked about Danny Wolf and what we saw from him, but I didn't hit on the veterans because I only have so much time. And I want to talk a little bit about Michael Porter Jr. and about Terrence Mann and what they did in this preseason game. And both of them looked good. And, I said on the prior episode that I'm not going to read too much into who played well, who played bad. What does that mean? Had these, grandiose takeaways about it, because the Nets did play, Hapoel Jerusalem, and it did look like it was competition that was very far from what they're going to face in the NBA level. So everyone really looked good because it was hard not to look good against them. But I will say in Michael Porter Jr.'s case, there were some things that I took away from it, and they weren't necessarily things that I didn't know, but they were seeing, it was seeing MPJ in a Nets uniform, in a Nets system, playing alongside some of these guys. And I have said since the trade was made that I think Michael Porter Jr. and Cam Johnson are in similar tiers of players. But when, answering the question of whether or not Michael Porter Jr. was going to be able to fill that Cam Johnson role at the level CJ did last season or even higher, I've said I'm very skeptical that he'll be able to do that. And a lot of that has to do with some of the skills that CJ brought to the table that I don't think Michael Porter Jr. necessarily does. And that is some of the secondary stuff that CJ did as a shot creator, as a ball handler, as a passer, doing those things beyond who the Nets' primary ball handlers are, doing that as a tertiary guy. And CJ really did that at a high level last season in terms of being a secondary pick and roll guy, a secondary isolation scorer, in terms of being a guy who comes off these zoom actions and pin downs and can handle the ball and get downhill and be a decent ball handler, be a decent mid-range scorer, be a good passer and playmaker and decision maker. And Michael Porter Jr., he looked good, I thought, in this game against Hapoel Jerusalem. You would expect him to, but I will say, the ball handling and some of those things, you do see some shaky moments. The passing, it just doesn't Michael Porter Jr. has never struck me as that kind of guy who can do those things and is going to be necessarily like a high-level ball handler, and it didn't look like it in this games. Like there was some moments where he got the ball in the fast break and he's fumbling the handle, and it's like leading himself to being a little bit late on reading where the floor is because he's just trying to get the dribble under control. You see him, just in the half court handling the ball. The ball is rolling up his wrist a little bit. Like he just doesn't look like that crisp of a ball handler, and I don't think that's news. And Jordi Fernandez pretty much admitted this much. When I said we talked to him about Michael Porter Jr.'s role, I think it was on like Thursday or Friday at Nets practice, and he said that he's going to want MPJ to be aggressive. He's going to put him in positions to score and do things that he didn't necessarily do in Denver. But he said he's not going to ask MPJ to dribble too much because that's not what he views him to be very efficient at. And so I thought some of that on individual plays, you could see that during this preseason game. And I just don't envision MPJ maybe having the kind of expanded role that some Nets fans might have been anticipating after the trade. Like you hear all this talk about MPJ wanting to show things he hasn't done. He's going to need to do that. The Nets don't have shot creators. He's going to have this expanded role. He feels like he plateaued in Denver and he's excited to explore his offensive game. But I don't necessarily think that that's going to be like him getting the ball and running high pick and roll like 5 times a game or anything along those lines. I think it's going to be more maybe him getting the ball off of some pin downs and trying to do some things like that, dribbling the ball, getting downhill, scoring in the mid-range. I also think it's going to be a lot of maybe him playing out of the mid post. Like that's a thing that he has alluded to and said he wants to do. He said that he feels like if he gets the ball in the mid post that he can score 6 to 8 points just from that spot per game. And then he also obviously can bump people off their spots. He can shoot off of people. And that could be a way that he can kind of play make in the intermediate without having to be a ball handler and do some of those other things. So that's what I see for MPJ. But I do think that the ball handling limitations that he has, the limitations that he has as a court mapper, a playmaker, a decision maker, I think it is going to be a step behind what we saw from CJ last season. And I don't think we're going to get the same kind of, overall production. Like I think MPJ might score as many points as CJ did, but I don't know if it's going to be on the same level of efficiency, from 2-point range or necessarily from playmaking and an assist or potential assist standpoint. So that's what I'd say for MPJ. And Terrence Mann, last thing I want to close it out on, Terrence Mann probably was the Nets' best player in this game. He had like 15 points. I think he was 6 or 7 or 7 of 8 from the field. And, he looked defensively, he looked really good. He had several steals, several breakaway dunks, was obviously overwhelming some of these players on this Hapoel Jerusalem squad who just didn't look like they could match up with him. And he hit his threes. And I think that I could see Terrence Mann being a guy like we went through this last season with Dorian Finney-Smith, obviously with Cam Johnson, with Dennis Schroeder, but I'd say DFS is probably the guy who I'd look at. I don't think him and Terrence Mann are one-to-one players, but, somewhat similar role, similar archetype. And I could just see Terrence Mann being this guy who is this, guy who has a chip on his shoulder coming off the Clippers trading him and then the Hawks salary dumping him to the Nets. And he's sort of like this cast off afterthought with the contract that he's on. And I could see him coming in, being a guy who embodies everything that Jordi Fernandez wants to do, guarding 94 feet, putting a lot of pressure on teams defensively on offense, being a guy who's shooting the 3-ball well and being a guy who's crashing the boards, making those high energy plays. Like I could just see that from Terrence Mann. And if you talk about how the Nets exceeded expectations last season, how they won some games that they didn't want to, and it was just off of effort. It was off of them playing harder than teams, wanting it more, and a lot of that was guys and veterans early in the season like Dennis Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith, and then throughout the year like a guy like Cam Johnson. I could see Terrence Mann just fitting into that role, being a guy who's a good vet, is pushing this Nets team, is having them play, elevating their game defensively, and then on offense is, hitting threes, maybe doing some secondary things that he hadn't in Atlanta or LA just because he has added opportunity. Just something to bank away. I think Terrence Mann was playing really hard in this game, even though it was a preseason opener against a Euro team. And I would say that, I could see him being a guy who, helps the Nets maybe punch above their weight at times. And that could be good for the development of rookies and just the culture, the C word that the Nets are trying to develop, and also just the vibe around the locker room. But I think there might be some fans on some nights who say, this is annoying. This is a veteran guy who plays really hard. He's helping us maybe stay in a game that we shouldn't, and maybe the Nets squeak out a few games because of it. So that's just something I would file away. I think Terrence was playing really hard in this game. Not something that I would necessarily say for MPJ. Like, I didn't bring it up when I was talking about MPJ. I was focusing on his offense, but MPJ didn't look too interested defensively in this game, and you could chalk that up to it just being a preseason opener. The Nets playing a non-NBA team, so we'll see. But Terrence Mann definitely did look engaged, and I could see him being a guy who is playing hard and maybe helping the Nets punch above their weight at times. So just file that away, and we'll see how that we'll see whether or not that comes to fruition. But that's all we have on today's Locked On Nets episode. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you have a second right now and you enjoy the content, smash that like button, leave a 5-star review, leave a comment on YouTube. Let me know what you think about how the Nets could reach the salary floor. Let me know what you think about Dariq Whitehead, MPJ, Terrence Mann, any of this stuff. We got a few more days before the Nets get back into preseason action in China. And then after that, they're coming home. We'll have some practices, and then we're getting right into the regular season. So things are churning along, and I'll have coverage of all of it and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.